Okay.
All right. Tonight, I am so glad to be up here because I get to introduce Sharon Cox. Sharon talks to us about transitions. This is multiple times that I've heard this parts of this presentation, and it's phenomenal. For me, it was life-changing to understand what's going on during transitions. I've used to tell my daughters when they're going through either good or bad transitions to help them understand just what's going on. Why am I so nervous? Where's the end of the tunnel? Things like that. So it's just been a completely, just amazingly invaluable discussion. So I'm so thankful she's here. And so with that, I will
Thank you.
hand it off to you.
All right. Now, do you want me to pin this on?
You can do it however you want. Carrie, you can pin it on.
That's all right. I don't know. Let me just hold it because
That's fine too.
That's gonna be better. Thank you. There's the camera. All right. Nice to see everyone. I get to see your pictures over there anyway. Thanks for being here, either by Zoom or in person. I've got 30 minutes to do an all-day workshop, so this is going to be the Reader's Digest version. While we're talking about this model, I do not want you to forget to say that you're going to get that slide deck. And in that slide deck is a reference list. And in that reference list are wonderful books by William Bridges. We're talking about his Hidden Treasures, a perfect name for somebody to talk about transition. So the book that he wrote when he first lost his job as a college professor, I think this is showing up on the So transitions, making sense of life's changes, and over 500,000 copies. So if you just want to go get one book, this is it. And Amazon will have it, and probably you can get it for 59 cents, knowing Amazon. If you're in an organization going through a lot of change, or if you're in a situation where you just need help managing change, he took that model, and this one's called Managing Transitions, Making the Most of Change. It's also over 650,000 copies sold. When his wife died, he wrote The Way of Transition, which is a very personal book. I've heard many people say, especially if they've attended this program and are familiar with this model, that this may be one of his very best books. So I do recommend that to you if that situation resonates with you. And then Richard Rohr, many of us are fans of Richard Rohr, but he's written one called The Wisdom Pattern. And he takes a very similar approach. So this is another reference. But those are the 4 best books, and that will be on the handouts that you get. Now, what am I talking about with Bridges and a model? Okay. What Bridges did, Bill Bridges years ago, is he helped us see, let me just come back over here. Have you ever heard the phrase, the change really threw me for a loop? Anybody ever said, oh, I didn't see that coming, or it just threw me for a loop? So that's an easy way to remember Bridges' model. And he says that in that loop, we basically go through a time of ending or letting go of how we've always done it. And then invariably we'll move into what he calls the neutral zone. And the way to think about the neutral zone is this wobbly. Wobbly, uncertain, who knows which end is up, I don't have a clue. That's the neutral zone. And then he says eventually you'll move into what he calls the new beginning. Now, you have sense enough to know that life's going to throw you more challenges, and so you'll probably do this over and over. And so this idea, though, of differentiating between change and transitions, if you listen to me for a second, you notice I'm going between the two. A change is outward, okay? A change is a new boss. A change is a new computer system. A change is having to move. A change is losing your job. A change is an outward thing that happens, okay? So let's go to the next slide here. And that outward thing that happens, with change, it's external. When I'm talking about transitions, it's all internal. Our whole conversation tonight is going to be, yes, that's the change. Now here's what it's like to live through it. So it's an internal thing. We talk about change and the goals that we have for ourselves. You're familiar with those kind of conversations. This is not so much about goals as understanding that I'm in a process. I'm in one heck of a process. And so it's more process oriented than it is goal oriented. It's more internally oriented than it is externally. And it's also very psychological in its nature. So we have to kind of get in touch with how we're feeling and talk about feelings. Whereas when you're talking about change, it's situation. So there's a difference between change and transition. Tonight, we're talking about transitions because it's all the internal work. And I love that expression. It's not the change that's an issue. It's the transitions that do us in. It's the inner work that can really trip us up and kind of keep us spinning sometimes. So what he did is help us see, okay, we talked about process, changes in the process. So inside, you go through an ending, a neutral zone, and a new beginning. Each of you sitting here tonight, given whatever your situations might be, or just need to be on Zoom, I could probably, by the time we're through tonight, I could say, where do you see yourselves? Are you in the ending? Are you more in the wobbly uncertain? Are you almost into the new beginning? You'll be able to see, well, I'm not so much there anymore. I'm more here. It's a process. It's an internal process. And people often tell me after we do this program, they'll say, you give me words to put around how I'm feeling. That's what Bridges' model does. It gives us words to put around how we're feeling. So then we can talk about it. Otherwise, you're just saying, no, I've never been through anything like this. You don't have words. But his words really do help. Let's go to the slide on the ending and next one. So when we go through these stages, ending, neutral zone, and new beginning, I want to talk about what to do to help in each of these. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, first thing about that ending. Understand that it's a grieving process because we got to let go of how we've always done it. So grief is bound to be in there. Okay? It's a grieving process. Now, you know enough about the grieving process to know that there's anger, frustration, all the stuff that goes with the grieving process. So when you see someone who's angry, understandably, they're going through a grieving process. When you hear bargaining, you can hear a grieving process. And eventually, when you're in the new beginning, you'll get more of a sense of acceptance. So understand that endings are about a grieving process. And what that does, it gives you a little bit more compassion for yourself and for other people who are going through this. I mentioned it's a process, and one of my favorite lines is, don't push the river, it flows by itself. So let me just mention that you can't push this. And it bothers me sometimes when I hear people say, just get over it. You know, that's just absolutely about the worst thing you can say to somebody. Because you can't push the process, you can't make things happen. It's just a process. And we have to be patient with ourselves in that process. I think it's also useful to recognize that when we talk about endings, it's important to mark the ending. And I actually, when I did this in hospitals across the country, I would actually start with a group by having a funeral. And so we would talk about, okay, if this change is going to work, oh, here we are. But I remember one place out in Seattle, and a corporation bought all 4 hospitals. Well, we had a whole lot of change, you know. And so first I said, we got to get over, you know, what we used to be. So that ending and needing to mark the ending and having a ritual of some sort to do that. I know when the church, when we were combining 2 conferences, the Western Kentucky Conference and the Middle Tennessee Conference, the bishop said, in order for these 2 groups to combine and become one, we probably need to start with a funeral. So we did. Everybody brought on a little 3x5 card into these meetings. That was 1,800 people on our church. And they, on a little card, they wrote down, in order for this change to really work, I need to give up. And they wrote it on a card. We put they talked about all of it in small group meetings. We put all those cards in old suitcases. We brought all those suitcases, there are about 12 of them, into the sanctuary. We put them up there by the altar. And we said, ending, done, over with. And we all walked out to go to lunch that day, singing amen, because we were letting go. And that's important. And we mark the ending. Came in after lunch and we all put on cards and put in an offering plate. The things that we didn't want to change no matter what was going to always be true of that group. So we're trying to make that internal shift, and that letting go is absolutely essential. So marking the ending is real important. Now, a way to do that that's real simple is just keep saying to yourself, that was then, and this is now. That was then, and this is now. I have to tell you, as I've been going through the aging process, there are just some things that I can't do anymore. And I look at some of what I used to do, like my golf swing, and I'll say, that was then, and this is now. I don't have the same swing. So we've got to really look at marking the ending and letting go of what we need to let go of. Another thing that I mentioned here is the value of quiet time to tune in and self-care. Everything I'm talking about is work. And you probably heard the expression, grief work is work, because it is. So it's work to pay attention to how you feel, to honor how you're feeling, to listen to what you really do need. You have to be intentional about this. It's not just going to happen. You get up one day and that work is done. It's very intentional, psychological work that you're doing. And I would have to say, as we go through this, that any effort that you make around self-care and balance and keeping yourself in a good place is time well spent. I'll be talking a lot more about that in the remainder of the program, but do not underestimate that when you're going through this, you've got to keep yourself in a good place. So do not feel guilty about saying, I just need a break. I'm taking the weekend and doing self-care and balance. I'll talk a little bit more about self-compassion because this is hard work, what we're doing. It's useful. As a friend of mine said, he brought back my copy of Transitions that I loaned him. And he said, this was a really helpful book. I wouldn't want to live through that again, but it's probably the best thing that ever happened. So it's a tough time. It's a useful time, but it also requires that we take good care of ourselves. So that ending and letting go, and the key phrase to help yourself, that was then, and this is now. You just have to really keep working. Now, let me also just mention, I've studied Chinese medicine a lot. And the Chinese say that in this time of the year, in the fall, is the ideal time to be letting go. Because the leaves are dropping off the trees. So I'm doing a whole lot of cleaning out, garage sale, taking stuff that, because this is the time of year to be letting go and cleaning out. And it does help. It's much harder to do that cleaning out in spring when everything is sprouting. So we got a little help from the universe to do this work. Now, eventually you'll know that you're moving from the ending into this wobbly neutral zone because you're going to feel much more a sense of reactivity. And when you start feeling reactive, that's a clue. I think I'm moving into this wobbly, uncertain time. Sometimes when I do this program, I call it in between trapezes. Because you know what you're letting go of, you're not really sure what you're catching on to, and it's a real sense of wobbling, uncertain. So in between trapezes is another way to look at this. When we're talking about that neutral zone, one of the key things is to be patient with yourself. That neutral, uncertain, wobbly, who's on first, which end is up, it's like a wilderness that you just gotta find your way through. Okay. So key thing there is you can't push the process. So don't say I'm gonna do this till the first of the year, and then after that I'm gonna. Doesn't work that way. It's a process that you have to live through, and that wobbly, uncertain time. One way to think about it is change your expectations. And simply, you've heard people say this, I found the best thing I could do was one day at a time. And that's it, okay? So you get off your back and say, okay, this is not easy, but I'm just gonna one day at a time. I've got a card someone sent me that says one brave, determined, smart, hopeful day at a time, but that's what it is. So you take things like maybe you do a month at a time and you say, these two things I really need to get done in the next 2 months. But you're taking baby steps. It's like going through a wilderness. What do you do when you're going through a wilderness? You get to here and you just take a reading and say, how's it going? And then you get a little further and say, okay, how was that? You know, but that's what you're doing. You've got to see yourself on a journey in a process a little bit at a time. That's a key thing to think about in that uncertain, wobbly neutral zone. Try to keep looking at the half full because that really helps your attitude. I'm gonna talk a lot more about that in just a minute and why it's so important. So short range goals, a little bit at a time. Pay attention to nudges. You ever get a nudge? Something just saying, you know, I think I need to call someone. I keep thinking about such and such. Her face keeps coming to mind. Something's telling me I need to check in with. Okay, pay attention to the nudges. Now I call them unexpected help. Davis kids me about that phrase. He said, every time I see you, I think about unexpected help. But that is unexpected help because something, you know, you just happen to bump into somebody. You went to Kroger and there is also. So pay attention to that unexpected help, to the nudges that cross your mind. And maybe if that's not happening to you, then just really work to listen. Sometimes when I'm in this neutral zone, I just take a walk and say, what do I need to hear? And then I just try to be quiet. Especially if you feel overwhelmed. I've learned something from Susan Beaumont. She's a consultant that our church has used. And she wrote an article that really caught my attention. It was called Overwhelm is Not a Problem to Be Solved. And I thought, really? I didn't get that article. And the essence of what she says in the article is whenever you're feeling overwhelmed, it's a signal to stop. Just stop. I would say stop and breathe, okay? But stop and notice what's trying to emerge. Very interesting, okay? Pay attention to the nudges, quiet time, listen up. This is what really helps in that wobbly, uncertain neutral.
I do the opposite. I do the opposite. I do more than more.
Absolutely, and that's human nature. You know, I try harder, I go faster. You know, well, what you're really doing is getting exhausted. And after a while, you don't even know what you do know. So it's really important to see this process and be patient with ourselves in the process and do some things that are kind of smart in the process. So short-term goals, and maybe somebody will be after you now. What are you going to do? What's going to happen? And you know, everybody's got all these what ifs and shoulda, coulda, woulda, and all this stuff. And you just say, I'm just doing one day, one foot in front of the other, you know, because that's what's so useful in this wobbly, uncertain time. The other thing, and this is what you guys are doing, is the networking and connecting with each other, because reaching out for help and this one who knows this one, I'm in the migrant ministry thing at church, and we just had a fellow from Afghanistan. He's been here like 5 years. He was an interpreter over there. He ran an IT company, but now that he's over here, he can't get a foot in the door. His English is perfect. He'd be wonderful, but he doesn't have a year's experience in IT. So here he spent 5 years doing odd jobs, trying to keep afloat when he could be a real help. So one of our folks met him, took him to the Nashville branch of the IT group, introduced him to the group. They made him an honorary member of the group. People came up and gave him business cards, and here we go. Okay, this one knows this one knows this one. So that networking is useful and can really happen in this uncertain time. The main thing I want to say about the neutral zone, I mentioned to you that it's a wobbly, uncertain time. Flip side, and what I most want you to hear, it's an opportunity for transformation. What do I mean by that? It's an opportunity for transformation. Sometimes, you know, we really do have to get to our wits' end before we can hear, before we can learn to trust, before we can reach out. I mean, I'm confessing that I'm a nurse, and I do not. I mean, I have to be ill before I call the doctor. You know, so I know what it's like to just put it off and think tomorrow will be better. But the real truth is, reaching out can start a very transformative process. Everybody, every personal friend I have, every colleague I have, when we talk about this and people talk about major changes in their life, they will often say, it was tough, but in many ways, it was the best thing that ever happened. I hear that phrase over and over and over again. It was the best thing that ever happened. I would, if I could go back, I wouldn't want to live through it again, but I would still do the same thing because it's, so you've got to begin to see, and as tough as it is, there's good work going on. Maybe you're finding out that you're stronger than you thought you were. Maybe you've got more friends than you thought you had that are real friends. Maybe you're getting to do something that you always, this fellow I'm having in mind as I'm saying this, he started his own business. He said, I always want to start my own business. And I got enough in my severance package to do that. And, and he did a great job, put a great business together. Opportunity for transformation. So I don't want you just to see the neutral zone as something you got to quit your teeth to get through. The new beginning, celebrate some small victories. I expect that you're going to be ambivalent. Some days it's a good idea, some days I don't know. So that back and forth is a normal human being response to all. And it's also important in that new beginning to celebrate small victories and appreciate the people around you who helped you in that. Now, as I walk through this and you think about where you are in your own journey, and I don't know anybody from anybody, so or anybody on Zoom, but I do know that all of you are going through transitions or you wouldn't be here tonight. So as you think about your transition personally, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand or do anything to let anybody else know, but can you sense that you're somewhere in that ending neutral zone or new beginning?
Very much.
Yeah. And so what Bridges does is he gives you the words to put around how you feel. I have a friend in Chattanooga, and every once in a while, she works in hospitals and has for years like I did. And every once in a while I'll call and say, how are you doing? She said, oh, I'm in that neutral zone. Oh, you wouldn't believe the neutral zone. What you got going on? So it's a wobbly, uncertain time, and we reach out for help. That's usually what I hear from her. So when you see yourself in this process, you at least then to say, okay, if I'm in the ending, then what can I do to help myself? Make sense? So getting words to put around how you feel is a major, major, major help. Now, speaking of words to put around how you feel, you get Bridges' model, okay? It's not rocket science. Okay? And I decided in going through this with you that the time we spend might be most useful if we talk about what can we do to help ourselves. Here we are somewhere along this road, somewhere in this process. What's going to help? So the next slide I have there, let's go to the next one. Some behaviors or habits that matter, that really can make a difference. So as we go through this process, what are some things we can do to help ourselves? The first one, and this is a biggie. It's first for a reason. That's our self-talk. You know the self-talk. You know that voice in your head. That voice in your head that says, oh, this is going to be a doozy. Ain't no way. That's the voice in the head I'm talking. We all have that voice in your head. Okay. You got to manage your self-talk. And you manage your self-talk by reframing things. I've gotten to do this just the last couple of days. And there was a situation where I thought was going one way and it went totally another way. And then I had to say to myself, something about this is useful. I just don't know what it is yet. I call that my all-purpose reframing. Whatever's going on, it's often real different from what you wanted or anticipated or whatever. Just say to yourself, something about this is useful. I just don't know what it is yet. Or you can say, I'm going to live through this and I'm going to learn from it. You're talking to yourself. You're doing positive self-talk. Okay, so reframing, I would almost say it's absolutely one of the top three things you have to learn to do to get through a transition. Because if the negative self-talk, I'm a dummy, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done, what the heck was I thinking, should have, could have, if you're doing all that stuff to yourself, you're just digging a hole and making it worse. I call that the downward spiral, okay? So you've got to get that shifted brain. And you've got to be able to say, well, it's tough, but other people have done it, I can do it too. 5 years from now, who's going to remember this? Whatever you choose to do, find some ways to reframe. Now, reframe why? Reframe so you have some energy. See, the whole point is to have energy to get through this process. So what can I say to myself that's gonna give me some energy? You're a dummy is probably not one of them. Okay? So, you know, instead of the accusatory or the judgmental, just say about something useful. They're gonna show up. Other people live through this, I can do it too. Yeah. So use that self-talk in a way that's gonna give you energy. Spiritual disciplines, prayer is a helpful time. And I say prayer and spiritual disciplines because those require quiet time. So if you're not having some quiet time, and I'm maybe talking 10 minutes, I'm not, you know, you'll find once you start using it that it'll expand because it's useful. But listen to a meditation on your phone. Just sit and breathe. One of the things I love to do is just sit on my porch and listen to birds. Just tune in, you know, what am I feeling? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? You know, tune into the five senses. But quiet, peaceful time each day is absolutely essential because you got to get back in touch with yourself. Quiet, peaceful time. Just as a jar, this is a favorite quote of mine, just as a jar of muddy water settles and becomes clear when it's still, so do we. I have a friend who actually got a jar of muddy water and put it on her kitchen windowsill. And she said, I put that there so I can remember, just as a jar of muddy water settles and becomes clear when it's still. So what I'm trying to do is hit the high spots, okay? If you do this, it's gonna help. If you do this, it's gonna help. This is not gonna help, okay? When we're talking about things to do that help, that quiet time is absolutely essential. And I'll be talking more about that when I talk about mindfulness. Try to look at what you're living through and see what the lessons might be. What pattern am I repeating here? One of the things I was just talking with a friend this afternoon about that. We were in a situation where this family was in great distress. And I said, I know one of my patterns is to rescue. I'm a nurse. I want to make it better. Okay. I can rescue you from 200 yards. I mean, I am a good rescuer. What I have finally learned, I'll be 80 in January, and I hope I have learned this life lesson. Sometimes people need to struggle because then they find out what their strengths are. And if I swoop in and rescue, I'm just making it all work. Yeah. But I've got to catch that pattern. So I was watching my daughter do it. And I said, you know, you watch me do this, so set some boundaries. Don't get in there and rescue because it's lessons learned the hard way. So look at what you're going through and say, what are the lessons? One of the lessons may not be to not be so hard on myself, but being so judgmental. You know, pull out the lessons in it and see those lessons learned. Make an effort to notice what's going well. We are wired to notice what's wrong. I'll talk about that in just a second. Talk about what's going well. That makes a huge difference. And this is a biggie. This is right out of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. Focus on the things you can do something about. We got an election coming up. I got strong feelings about what needs to happen in the election. Okay, but there's only so much I can do. Okay? There's nothing I'm going to do that's going to go this way or that way. So I do what I can do, and then I make an effort to turn off the company and just breathe, especially right now because it's in a full tilt. So stay focused on the things you can influence. Now, why am I saying that? Because when you focus on things you can influence, you have energy. The minute that you get out trying to dabble in stuff that you can't do a thing about, de-energize. I can often walk in a group and I'll listen for 30 minutes or so. And I can tell, have I got a reactive group that's bouncing off the wall, trying to fix everything, you know? Or have I got some people that are focused on something they can do? So a lot of times in hospitals, the work I did for years, my job was just to get groups focused on what they can influence. And as soon as they got focused on stuff they influenced, they had a good time, they put a game plan together, and had some energy, and they looked at me like I was a miracle worker. And all I did was get them focused on things they could do something about. So notice your energy level. If your energy level is dropping, you're probably slipping into the react. If you've got some energy, you're staying focused on what you could do something about. That's huge, and it comes right from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, I've alluded to these twice, and so I'm digging down to two things that are gonna be a huge help. And one of them is mindfulness. Now, I've been talking about this for 15 years. And I am well aware that some people are ready to throw up if they hear the word one more time. I mean, you go in the grocery line and you get mindfulness or whatever. So I am very aware, and therefore I've recently started just calling it noticing. Okay, because that's what you're doing. You're noticing the good stuff. You're noticing the breeze. You're noticing the color of the leaf on the ground. You're noticing the sound that you just heard from the bird that you never heard before. You know, so just notice. Okay, why is this so important? Because it gets you down out of your head. That's the major thing. So what are we talking about? The intention to focus on right here, right now. Just be here now. That's simple. In fact, I use that phrase. I used to travel a great deal. And sometimes I was doing, 4 cities in 5 days. And so I really had to say, oh, what day is this? And what's happening? And I would just say about 5 times a day, just be here. So it's about intentionally choosing to be right here, right now. Now, there's a kicker: without judgment. That's the kicker. And I remember saying to a mindfulness teacher, I said, I'm a consultant. People ask me for my opinion. They ask me to come in and judge something. And I said, I do it like blinking. And he said, well, then at least notice that you judge. And then a friend of mine said, and don't judge the judger. So you got to get the judgment out of it. Okay, without judgment. Because as soon as you judge, then you make up a story, and here we go. And so we're talking about managing feelings by just being right here, right now. Now you might say, well, I'm still going to have feelings come up that are tough to manage right here, right now. So let's say you find yourself really angry about something. So take a breath. Notice that you're feeling angry. Notice where in your body that shows up. One of the things I've discovered in my old age is when I get really, really mad about something, I hold my breath. I had no idea that I held my breath until I started noticing where am I feeling this. A moment ago, I was talking about grief. Whenever I get talking about grief, my throat will tighten up and my voice actually changes. So it shows up somewhere. So notice where it shows up. And then wait 90 seconds without making up a story. So a lot of times when I get frustrated, my husband, we've been married for 49 years, and there are moments. And so sometimes I will just walk out the garage and I'll say, this is what frustration feels like. Notice where I feel it. And then I actually start counting, and I'll say 90, 89, 87, 86, 80. Usually by the time I get in the 50s, it's gone because I didn't make up a story. So human nature means we see or hear something, and then we make up a story about what we see or hear, which decides how we feel, which then decides what we do and how we act. You know how long that takes? About 1/10 of a second. We go from this to this to this, and here we are, knee-jerk reaction. The emotion only lasts 90 seconds unless we make up a story. So if we can keep ourselves just here in this moment, not judging, not making up a story, not with the negative self-talk, then I've adapted a phrase that I've heard on several mindfulness meditations that I listen to. And this one teacher says, see that emotion is like a weather system moving through. It's cloudy right now. And especially if you stay around here, it'll be sunny in a minute, So see it like a weather system moving through and don't judge it. So the mindfulness can be huge. And let's go to the next slide for just a moment, because there's something that I want to touch on in that. Did you see the difference between mindful and mindful? Which one is more mindful in that picture? Right? Yeah. Just smelling the grass and feeling the breeze. Okay. Now, I don't want you to then see your thoughts as the enemy that you have to get rid of. Okay, if you find yourself drifting from this moment into your to-do list for next week, you just say, thinking, just breathe and come back. The breath is usually a good anchor, and hopefully you are breathing, so the breath will bring you back to just right here, right now. Now, why am I stressing this? Because the negativity bias is something you have to be aware of. It's real easy to get down on yourself. It's real easy to get into a negative downward spiral. That's my heart ain't awful, painful kind of stuff. The negativity can just slip in without even realizing. So the reason I'm talking about it is you have to understand we're wired this way. Our brains are wired. It's a thing from ancient whatever to protect us when we cave in. But the whole point then was for your safety, be aware and be cautious and, notice everybody. Now we're talking in 2024, we're saying that's not really necessary. Catch yourself. Because that negative bias that makes us, that's why negative campaigning works. That's why gossip works. We are wired to hold on to the negative. And the positive, by the way, slides off like our brains were made of Teflon. Sometimes somebody will say, oh, I really like that outfit. And usually the first thing I'll say is, oh, I won't tell you how old it is. I'll just say thank you. And I'm thinking to myself, why can't you just say thank you? So the negative grips us. And you got to catch that. And this will help you get rid of that negativity bias. The next slide where I actually go through these biases. One more. There we go. When you get into this offsetting the negativity bias, you'll find that it's easier for you to appreciate what other people are doing. I'm going to talk for a minute in just a second about gratitude. I think it's the secret sauce myself. And you'll find that the kindness and the care that you were able to offer others and for yourself, it just starts a whole cycle. That's so much better than bless my heart ain't awful. That's the downward spiral. Make sense? So do we want the upward spiral that gives us energy? Do we want the downward spiral that doesn't feel very good and doesn't help a thing? Now, when I talk about this whole idea of mindfulness, I put it right together with gratitude. Because gratitude, I could do an hour on just physically how gratitude helps you. Gratitude releases chemicals in your brain, endorphins, serotonin. And so when you want to give yourself a boost, think of something you're grateful for. I start every day, 5 things I'm grateful for. When I fall asleep at night, 5 things I'm grateful for. You'll sleep better and your day will go better when you start noticing the good. So live through something difficult and say, well, at least this time and notice things you're grateful for. And they're always there. It's always there. So gratitude is a choice that we make. We're choosing to not fall into the negativity trap. We're choosing to use a better one-liner and help ourselves internally. We're choosing to be proactive instead of reactive. As I say that, I was driving down Franklin Road tonight, and something said, don't forget to mention. There's a consultant that works with people who are going through lots of change. And she has a 4-part test that she sends to people before she ever takes them on as a client. And I said, what's the test like? She said, I just need to know if they're reactive or proactive. I said, how can you tell that in a 4-point test? She said, you can just listen to people, how they respond to questions. If you find that folks are in kind of life is happening to me, bless my heart, can you hear me? Life is happening to me, that's reactive. If somebody, on the other hand, is more along the lines of, this is what I feel like I need to do. I need to really change, Are we in charge? Are we self-authoring? That's the term she uses. I thought that was such a fascinating term. You see yourself as self-authoring. Is the locus control in me? I decide how I feel, what I do, who I talk to, who I don't, what I say, how I frame it, Am I just letting life happen to me? It's the victim. or do I see myself as self-awesome? Reactive, proactive. One gives you energy, one no energy. Make sense? So I'm trying to condense a whole bunch of stuff in, but just say clearly what I'm trying to say is it's just so important that you get out of that victim downward spiral negativity stuff. And it is just contagious. So you've got to be intentional about this. You got to be intentional to carve out that 10 minutes in the morning for quiet time. You got to be intentional about taking that walk and just this. You got to be intentional about who you hang around with and who you don't. You know? So this is really important that it's not about just life happening to me. It's being self-authoring. That's a key thing. So the self-talk, the skill and learning how to reframe it, huge. And taking time to just notice, whether you call it mindfulness or whatever you call it. Just notice what's going on around you, notice your own breathing, and then notice what you're grateful for. So these are some things that actually make a difference. Now, I also wanted to give you some tips when you're trying to get used to being grateful and noticing the things you're grateful for. So I've got the slide next one on the transformative power of gratitude. Remember, gratitude is a choice. You're not just gonna land in your lap. You gotta choose to be grateful. It's a practice and it's an attitude. It's really the lens through, if you really practice this and pay attention to it, it becomes the lens through which you see life. And I love, there's a slide that I use when I do a program on gratitude. It actually has this butterfly. And the slide says, gratitude doesn't necessarily change the scenery around us. The scenery is still the same scenery, but it washes the lens through which we see. And that's the whole point. Yeah, absolutely. So as we talk about this, there's a few key lines to leave with you. Let's go to the next slide. These are kind of my 3 key points to think about as you ponder all of this conversation. Without a transition, change is just rearranging the furniture. Did you ever have somebody say, well, they went through a lot, but you know, quite honestly, I'm not sure that anything ever really changed. So the transition, the inside work is absolutely essential. Susan Beaumont, when you're feeling overwhelmed, stop and notice what is trying to emerge. You got a lot of time to emerge. I've used acupuncture for years, and my acupuncturist about this time last year, she said, all right, we're looking at another year coming up, and I want you to do something really different. She said, I've known you for 20 years, and you're always pretty, you know, focused and organized, and you travel around the country and you had to be organized, but you're retired now. And she said, I want you just to kind of have a different mantra. And I said, okay, what would you suggest? And she said, as we move into next year, just see what emerges. Never in my life have I just seen what emerges. So what I'm trying to say to you is you go through these changes and stopping and seeing what needs to emerge is essential. And then this is one line that I hope rattles in your head for quite some time. We overestimate the things that we think we can control, and we underestimate the things that we can choose. And all the people said, amen. We overestimate what we think we can control, and we underestimate what we can choose. See, all tonight, I've just been talking about things you can choose. You can choose gratitude. You can choose to notice. You can choose to not make up a story about what you're living through and just let the emotion pass through like a wave. You can make these choices. So I hope I've given you some things to think about. You'll have the handouts. So, I mean, the slide deck, so you can go back over it. These folks have got my home number, if that's useful to you, or I'll just go ahead and give it to you. My cell phone number is 615-714-6690. So if you need it, call me. Be glad to meet you for a cup of coffee and talk through any of this. I can talk about transitions so the cows can. In fact, somebody at church, I mentioned that I was doing this on Monday night, and they said, oh, Sharon, that transition is gonna be written on your tombstone. I said, "You're probably-" But his model has been very helpful, and I hope it's helpful. Now, questions?
Can you repeat your phone number again? I'm gonna call you. This is Georgia Cross.
My phone number, 615-714-6690. Sharon Cox. And the email, by the way, you'll see that on the handouts when you get it. Just put E in front of my name, E for electronic, E Sharon Cox at AOL.com. That also tells you how old I am if I'm still using AOL.
Thank you so much. This really spoke to me. I'm into mindfulness and I'm into yoga and all that stuff, but all the negative stuff has just been getting in my brain. So I love all the reminders
Well,
for gratitude and framing and all the things.
yeah, that last quote's gonna be real useful to you. Because you can choose to not let all that negative stuff get in your brain.
It's Georgia Cross.
There's a word called T. It's the thought, emotions, actions.
Yeah,
So your thoughts drive your emotions and emotion drive your actions. So you gotta control your thoughts.
amen, sister. Other questions from anybody on, I keep looking at there, thinking I'm looking at there.
Basically, yeah, we have to face it.
You got a question?
Anything else that has emerged as we talk?
Anybody on Zoom, any more questions?
Which book do you recommend for the first read?
What book do I recommend?
They must be all good.
On transitions.
Yeah.
This book right here. Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. That's, that gives you his model and his experience. I bet I've given away 30 copies of it. And it's, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sharon, thank you once
Didn't
again.
think I could do that in 30 minutes.
I knew you could. I knew you could. God will see you next week. Thank you for attending. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
You are welcome.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we drop it there.